been able to check out some stories very thoroughly. The same stories worked on over years, so it gives me a good insight into some certain situations that people would like to know the truth about.
So what about Ron Adams?
Well, I met Ron Adams around about 1994, and I went to his house in Chase Road in London, and sat and talked with him and his wife and one of his sons. Can't remember his son's name, but he was definitely very traumatized in talking about being abducted by alien beings. I'll point out that both the wife, Ron, the husband, and the son all believed they'd been abducted by aliens. The son looked really traumatized, but the most sensational fact that people would like to know is that when they were majorly abducted by alien beings, they were the only civilian family allowed to live amongst the military personnel of US Air Force Bentwaters from 1970 to 1976. US Air Force Bentwaters being the military depot where possible alien contact supposedly occurred in December 1980, a case which has been very heavily covered up by the military.
What's been covered up?
Well, I think the fact that it was a very bad, quite violent argument with the military generals, about 5 or 6 military generals and 3 small alien beings, is what they've covered up. That's what they don't want you to know about.
How do you know that?
The American military since 1947, which means definitely referring to the Roswell crash as alien contact, not just crashed like aliens and dead alien bodies, but some aliens surviving and being able to convey technological advice to the American military. The alien greys had supposedly agreed to work with the Americans from about 1947 on, from about the time of the Roswell crash. So what you know as stealth fighters, the F-117A for instance, and the stealth bomber, the word stealth indicates alien-assisted technological development. However, other alien species had warned the Americans to be careful of the Zeta Reticulans, who are the most treacherously behaving of all the alien species. And as time went by, the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s, stealth fighters, both secretly developed and when they were finally in the public domain, had been quite relatively frequently exploding in mid-air. And Americans began to realize that the Zeta Reticulans, as they had been warned they would, had made a fool of the American military by deliberately working into the technological advice a factor which would cause the American stealth fighters to explode. Sometime in 1980, a stealth fighter had exploded and crashed around the area of Suffolk. I can't say exactly where, but that's what's supposed to have triggered the demand for a meeting with the 3 small alien beings, presumably behaving in an ambassadorial sense with the military generals.
At Bedwaters?
Well, the meeting was convened close to where the stealth fighter had crashed. Yeah, at US Air Force Bentwaters.
So that's Suffolk, yeah.
Near to Rendlesham Forest, of course, and it's well known that the UFO, the Christmas tree-like object, had manoeuvred around the forest. We have looked at an area recently where there seems to be an area where fern just does not grow. There's needle grass growing, and the trees growing within that circle are all dead.
Where is that?
That's to your right as you're approaching East Gate. US Air Force Bentwaters East Gate, which has lent itself to the title Left at East Gate, written by Larry Warren and Peter Robbins. Why I believe that? this could be a big thing. Well, I don't know whether to believe it. So these are statements by, well, by a confidant who, well, was very highly placed in a charity organisation in 1984. But regarding the crashed stealth fighter, when I had a private conversation with Tony Dodd, the UFO investigator who died a couple of years ago, he had heard about photographs of a crashed stealth fighter somewhere in an office in Suffolk. And when he found out about the photographs, kept in a secret drawer, they went absolutely crazy. All the personnel within the building went absolutely mad. And when Tony told me about that, he said that he felt that that had made him think that all that the US Air Force Bentwaters incident was a crashed stealth fighter, and that, you know, crashed modern technology was being suppressed as like it wasn't as good as they were making people think. And I said to Tony, well, actually that sounds supportive of the version of events that I've been told. Because why on earth are they going to go bananas about one single bunch of photographs of one crashed stealth fighter when there's going to be quite a few? I mean, even in the prototype stages. Another thing is my confidant, who was highly placed in a charity organisation in 1984, what he had been talking about was the way that all charity organisations in 1984 all of a sudden had been experiencing American NSA and CIA agents clawing their way to the top of them all over the world. Of course this was happening especially in Britain, and Britain does have the special relationship with the Americans. But my confidant for that had asked the American in his particular charity organisation, might have been the World Wildlife Fund, what was going on. It gave a funny impression with Americans clawing their way to the tops of all charity organisations, and the American answered, stated the following words, and I'll never forget this confidant telling me this in 1991. It's because there's been a bad mistake in a place at US Air Force Bentwaters. The military tried to do a deal with 3 small alien beings, but the deal fell through. It was 5 or 6 military generals, and a detail from this is one of the military generals started crying at that particular meeting. All of the other base, you know, the sergeants, the people, the privates like Larry Warren, we use the word private, they use the word regular soldier or something, all were kept out of that particular meeting. It was only the very highest military generals that got that.
So you're talking about Charles, you're talking about Colonel Holt and
I think higher than him, Gordon Williams.
Yeah.
At Co. Higher than Charles Holt. Charles Holt doesn't know about this, and he's like known to swear pretty violently about not knowing what was being kept out of that inner circle. So anyway, that's where that bit of information came from. There's the question of why I believe that. I mean, I was in a car with Jeff Gilbertson, who wrote the book The Dark Gods around about 1993 or thereabouts, driving along, and we were going towards Yeovil. We were looking at various interesting bases, military bases and stuff, and as we were driving along, Jeff said, I was a journalist for the New Musical Express in 1984 when it was taken over by the American CIA. And I thought, well, at the same time as that sounds like a bizarre statement, it also sounded bizarrely supportive of what the confidant was saying was happening with the charity organisations. It wasn't exactly the same, it just sounded reminiscent of a phenomenon which did seem to be happening in around about 1984.
So what was this mistake? What was this mistake at Bentwaters?
What caused
the Woodbridge
violent argument? What caused the breakdown of talks?
Yeah.
Well, in my opinion, it's to do with Americans coming on a bit too heavily in favour of their capitalist system. This whole thing of handing over money for goods, whereas the aliens possibly didn't have any monetarization system whatsoever. They didn't have money, and they're just like walking out of their homes, picking apples off trees and going back, and that's a far simpler system. When the capitalist system was generating.
Why would that have a row with? I mean, I can't see how that's a major connection. How you do business.
Well, I think that the capitalist logic is the class logic, the class war logic is a little bit too violent and evil sounding, really.
But you're
too
saying
polarized.
that you've already said that the Zeta Reticuli. I'll get this framed again. I'm. So how? I don't understand how that would cause a row in the
really
middle of a field with a crashed stealth fighter.
Well, the Americans felt betrayed, but I think there's also a question of their economic system, because there's the report of the three small alien beings with large heads walking into a butcher's shop in Biddenden in Kent sometime in 1980.
Yeah.
And the story is that they reacted angrily to the request for money and then grabbed at the meat. And tried to grab it out. The
How on earth?
wifey
Okay.
in the butcher's shop put up a fight to get the meat back, but the aliens clearly betrayed this anger at the request for money. So there
you've got these three aliens walking into a butcher shop in Kent,
which sounds
and it
crazy.
seems perfectly normal. Oh, three aliens walking in. So I mean, there
She
was
chased
an anger
after them. She went mad at them and chased them.
because they weren't looking. They were looking. They didn't pay, or the fact that
Yes,
they were
that's
aliens.
right. They
I
didn't.
mean, this seems ridiculous.
Yeah, I know it sounds totally ridiculous, but the same woman, told the same story 13 years later to a best friend of hers, and that best friend walked up to Jeff Gilbertson at a crop circle conference and told him the story all over again. So she seemed to have told it pretty seriously 13 years later.
Could you describe the ETs or
Small beings with little guys with large heads who didn't like being asked for money for her meat. Overnight, during that night, supposedly all the meat disappeared from the fridge, all vanished. So the man and wife came back to their small butcher shop in Biddenden to find all the meat completely disappeared. Then.
So you're saying that this is a reason why at the Rendlesham Forest UFO incidents, when the top brass were having a discussion with the ETs, that the whole thing was a row about commerce.
It does suggest that the aliens were arguing about the value of money, and they were having a much more violent argument than you or I could think. That, we can't imagine such a violent argument would arise, but
why were the military conned? I mean, if the planes are blowing up, the aircraft are blowing up, surely there'd be much more reason to have a row about that.
Yes, well, there was, and that was part of the argument. That was why there was a row, but the aliens are clearly from a money-free society, and they don't like They don't like us arguing in favour of our militarily organised society. Right, if you find...
Take your hand down.
Right. If you find it's difficult to believe that...
Start again.
Right.
Yeah.
If anybody finds it's difficult to believe that an ideological clash between Americans and alien beings should be so severe, one might remember that the capitalist forces outside of Russia in 1917 sent 12 armies to obliterate the Soviet Union, which was just forming. That's a hell of an ideological clash, and it was all about the formation of an equalized society, destroying the profit system. And I'm afraid the argument between the Americans and the aliens must have had something like that, the quality of that ideological clash, because the Americans were absolutely intransigent, and the aliens were just as intransigent as Lenin and Trotsky in 1917, and Trotsky completely smashed 12 armies, one after the other, and is recorded as having had the heaviest ever human brain, heavier than Einstein's, heavier than James Joyce's. Uh, the other two big brilliant thinkers you would think of. So he would have looked like a pretty large-headed individual himself, being attacked by American forces amongst like 11 other countries' forces. So
Okay, let's concentrate now on Ron Adams.
yeah, right. Ron had lived from 1970 to 1976 amongst the military personnel of U.S. Air Force Bentwaters, and was the only civilian family allowed to be there.
What did the family comprise of?
Two sons, a daughter-in-law, according to Nicola Lisa Williams, and husband and wife. Obviously, the daughter-in-law was like prospective wife to one of his sons, and is going to have been like fiancée, then actually married, and all that. So they're going to have gone through all these things. So the daughter-in-law, coming from outside the family of Ron, also believed she'd been sleeping in Ron's house in amongst U.S. Air Force Bentwaters personnel, and she seriously believed aliens had come through the walls and ran round her bed. And Ron's wife believed she'd been like suddenly floating up into the air and going out through the wall into the garden. Ron was
Could you stop using your hands? Could you do that again?
Right,
please?
okay.
Sorry, because
Ron
it's getting you're in the front of the camera. If you
right.
can avoid it.
Ron was abducted countless times.
Could you go back to the composition of the family?
Yeah. The two sons, a daughter-in-law, and the husband and wife. And it's interesting that the daughter-in-law, as well as the two sons and the husband and wife, also believes that she had alien experiences during those years between 1970 and 1976, living at U.S. Air Force Bentwaters. That's a completely different family person coming to live in that place. So the whole lot, each civilian person living in that house, each believed they'd experienced aliens. The daughter-in-law believed aliens had come through the walls and ran round her bed, very much like the description by Whitley Strieber in Communion. Sounds utterly incredible, but it's what each person believed who'd lived in that one civilian house.
Are all the stories exactly the same, or are there different stories for each one?
They're different sorts of stories with the same quality, same property. The aliens slightly childlike quality to their behaviour. The small alien beings with large heads, and big black eyes. It's a slightly childish quality, like jumping up and down in the bed and stuff. Ron's wife was floated up into the air and out into over the garden and stuff like that. All sorts of experiences.
Can you elaborate?
I want to say that between 1970 and 1976, the whole family were becoming very, very friendly with all of the military personnel. So it must be remembered that this whole family and the daughter-in-law and stuff are all being asked out to all the dances, the Christmas parties, the birthday parties, the seeing the New Year in at New Year with all the military personnel. Their whole society became nothing but the personnel at U.S. Air Force Bentwaters, except of course for immediate family. Anyway, in 1976, Ron's family left Suffolk for London. Began living in London. Chase Road is where they got a house, and Ron changed the name of his cottage to Crowley Cottage, I think.
That's after Alistair Crowley.
Yes, after Alistair Crowley. Thing is that the family remained in touch with all of these really, really good friends and carried on going to all the kiddies' birthday parties and stuff like that. So the social life remained very much U.S. Air Force Bentwaters oriented. They were going back and forward all the time on the train to Suffolk,
To Woodbridge, yeah.
to Woodbridge and all that, to Rendlesham Forest, to U.S. Air Force Bentwaters.
Did they have contact with anybody at the Woodbridge base? Was this exclusively Bentwaters?
I think probably I would say all of the military personnel at a guess. But I want to say that the important thing is that after the dates of the U.S. Air Force Bentwaters supposed incidents in late December 1980, which are supposedly 26th, 27th, 28th, 29th of December 1980, when fishermen had been warned in a few weeks in advance to not fish around the area, quite strangely, as Jenny Randalls found out. Um, from that point in time, there was a sudden, without explanation, cut-off of social contact of all of the military personnel with Ron Adams' family. They just, all of the family, all of a sudden heard nothing from U.S. Air Force Bentwaters personnel. They heard nothing from anybody. Nothing from anybody in Woodbridge. The whole lot cut off. And Ron sat there and said to me, so I do think something really big did seem to have happened in that month in 1980. I know other people will have seen UFOs, maybe seen aliens in Rendlesham Forest. It doesn't matter. A much, much bigger thing than usual had happened in late December 1980, at US Air Force Bentwaters, and presumably involving the troops and the police force based there, and running out into Rendlesham Forest and seeing the UFO, Christmas tree-like UFO, moving about.
You got some information about the row that happened between the top brass and the ETs.
Well, there is the detail is that one of the generals started crying, but I haven't been able to find out which one. He broke down under the extreme pressure, the serious stressfulness of the altercation, really, between the three representative alien beings standing there in the clearing that the military.
The meeting, what happened?
Well, it seems like one of the generals broke down and started crying under the stressfulness of the situation. I think there were 6 generals. We haven't been able to find out the names for definite of each one of them, but I would suspect that Gordon Williams was one of them.
But to have 6 generals in any location at the same time must mean that this whole event was staged, it was planned.
Yes, I think it was planned well in advance. I mean, there had been the crash of the stealth fighter, but I haven't been able to find out the date of the crash of the stealth fighter sometime in 1980. But I think that the strangeness of the experience of the Swindon UFO research group, where this Raymond Smithers infiltrated their group.
Who's Raymond Smithers?
That's a pseudonym for the infiltrator. The group,
Swindon UFO infiltrator group. Was it by who? What agency?
Well, the Swindon UFO group never found out exactly which group, but they found out he was a police officer after they'd rumbled him by means of rigging a camera up so that it would take a photograph of whoever was going to pick up a message. And the Swindon UFO group had been getting hassled for quite a while and receiving mysterious messages telling them all to beware of investigating UFOs. It was intended to put them off investigating UFOs.
What kind of things were they investigating? And remember, Swindon is north of Marlborough, and it's also in the area of some of the stuff mentioned by Barry King about underground bases.
Yeah, well, I think they were just simply seen as a threat just because they were a UFO group, but they used the method of organisation of having only 6 members. They planned to have nothing but 6 members only and were completely exclusive and would not admit anyone else. They gave in to accepting Raymond Smithers as a 7th member, and then started receiving really strange messages.
Such as?
Just threatening messages to make them stop investigating UFOs.
What kind of cases were they involved with, and what connection has this got with
just basically basic UFO sightings?
What connection has this got with the crashed stealth fighter?
I just think that the meeting in December 1980 was planned, as you say. I think it was planned a good few months in advance, and that the Swindon UFO group had simply been seen as a threat simply because they were a UFO research group.
But is that not because they were in the Amesbury Boscombe Down area where there was a crash of a stealth fighter on the Boscombe Down runway?
What date was that
I
crash?
don't know, but there was a crash of a stealth fighter or some kind of a fighter which landed on this Boscombe Down runway and then was covered up by tarpaulins and things after it landed. But you can see the runway very clearly from the A303.
Well, I don't know about that crash.
But I don't see what relevance this has to the Rendlesham Forest bent borders thing. What's the?
I think it just conveys the advance warning of the authorities. They knew something was going on, so they tried to put the most tightly organised UFO group off investigating, and they did put them off. The Swindon UFO group, the 6 original members, were very surprised to find out that the infiltrator was a very, very good person, a very sane, rational person, who was later to become a male nurse in a hospital. He was a totally together guy. He wasn't like a joker, you know. He was a really serious type of bloke who'd been a police officer, so he must have been put up to it by the authorities. But I think it relates to what was to happen, and it conveys the authorities knew something big was going to happen. Remember that Larry Warren mentioning the detail of celebrities turning up in the area late December with cameras ready to take photographs of the UFO? Remember that detail?
Where does that detail? Is that detailed in the book?
It's in, at the very least, it's in his interviews with Linda Moulton Howe, which he has uploaded into her Earth Files website. He definitely refers to that. He was really shocked at it, and it's a detail which makes him really angry when he thinks about it.
Because clearly the social scene, somebody gaffed.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be
that does suggest considerable, advance warning, advance notice that there's going to be a really, really big thing going on in Rendlesham Forest. Right, I'd like to point out that the question of the American CIA penetrating charity organizations all over the world, and including Scientology, clawing their way to the top of that, and presumably the New Musical Express, as Jeff Gilbertson seems to have found, related to the amount of money the Americans were frightened of needing to spend to develop weapons that would contain the alien presence on the planet Earth. The money was planned to be directed from all of these charity organizations to American, quote, black projects, but obviously the American weapons project, the anti-alien, anti-UFO weapons projects. So the Americans are definitely worried by the amount of money they're spending on this, whilst they're trying to keep it away from the public, which is quite corrupt of them.
Of course.
Regarding that detail, you might be interested to know that I met a pathologist, and I really need to use a pseudonym here. We agreed upon a pseudonym of Keith Heaps because this pathologist does not want to be specifically identified, but a pathologist is a very establishment-connected person. A lot of British pathologists were actually consulted about the photographs of John F. Kennedy, what happened to John F. Kennedy's body after it was hit.
What is about John F. Kennedy and his body?
Pathologists in Britain were consulted about the photographs and stuff, and where the bullet, what directions the bullets had to have come from and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, the pathologist in Britain around about 1995
We've got to stop there. I'm sorry. So this pathologist.
Right, I met a pathologist around about 1995, and he started telling me that his sister had been promoted in Silicon Valley in California. Of course, that was a good thing to start with, but later on, all of a sudden, all Keith knew, Keith Heaps being the pseudonym I'm using for this pathologist, was all of a sudden his sister was on the phone to him from America and crying. She was in tears because of how violently the Americans had threatened her when they had to tell her that they were developing weapons to shoot down alien craft. So Keith Heaps wouldn't believe his sister quite so simply, and phoned round four top American military generals, phoning America. No American military general in Britain. He phoned round four American generals who were all in America and demanded to know what was going on. Is it true that the Americans are developing weapons to shoot down extraterrestrial craft? And each American general told him, yes, it's true. Well, Keith tried to ask the most difficult conceivable questions and get the most complex conceivable answers he could get out of the generals to make absolutely sure he wasn't being made a fool of. He phoned them one after the other, and after the fourth one had come out with sufficiently coherent description, would he only then believe the four generals and his sister that the Americans are making weapons to shoot down extraterrestrial craft.
What time period are you talking here?
Pardon?
What era, what time? What, 80s,
When
90s?
the pathologist was talking to me?
Yeah.
1995 is when I said, yeah. He'd been a pathologist for a few years, and his sister had only recently been promoted, but presumably she's pretty good on computers and stuff like that. But her position seemed to have had to relate to the need to know thing. And American NSA people had taken it upon themselves to inform her that they are in the process of developing anti-extraterrestrial weapons, and they did it so heavily to her, they had her breaking down in tears.
What kind of pathologist are we dealing with here that can phone up generals and have them talk to them?
I know, that's a difficult question. But
why did you get to know him? I mean, why did he talk to you?
Yeah, I know. I think that's a little bit difficult. Maybe I should keep some things to myself, really. But he was at a Star Trek meeting, and I'd been invited along to a Star Trek meeting, and we all sat around. We just got to know each other, and all I knew him as was a Star Trek fan with hundreds, every conceivable Star Trek cassette tape in his library, and we were just sitting having a pretty ordinary conversation. Then he started telling me about that in his flat, back in his flat.
This presumably is in Scotland.
Well, it might have been in Scotland, might have been. I don't really want to say.
Okay. So what was the
remember, I've got a railway pass. I'm all over the country.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm one of two persons only that know a university lecturer has seen what we say is a shapeshift. She thinks her best friend turned into an alien being right in front of her. Obviously, I don't like the word shapeshift. It's like a shifting of shape.
Yeah.
But obviously, this technological device the aliens possess, which generates a hologram or disperses a hologram, some sort of illusion that you're seeing a human being that's possessed by the aliens, failed for a moment, and this university lecturer in Britain seriously believes she saw her best friend turn into a small alien being. That woman was so terrified. Me and the one other guy she talked to about it did not want to ever talk to her about it again.
What kind of being?
But I'm just pointing out that with my railway pass, I found out about a lot of stories all over Britain.
What kind of alien being was it?
She said small, very, very fetus-like. So big was the head, so disproportionate was the head to the size of the body.
What were the eyes?
Ah.
Small eyes, very small little eyes.
Oh, big eyes. But that's all the detail I've got. She was so frightened. We were glad really to keep it out of the conversation really later on. So
back to the pathologist.
Yeah.
What was the he was looking at the Kennedy stuff or what?
Well, not him personally. I know that Dr. Busuttil in Edinburgh University. Well, he's a pathologist who works with Edinburgh University, but he was consulted. I'm just saying that pathologists can get quite big jobs that the public don't really realise is happening. But I mean, Dr. Busuttil is one of the people you probably wouldn't know have been sent details of the Kennedy assassination to look at.
Well, I mean, this is 50 years ago.
Yeah, I know it is, but it conveys that pathologists do have big contacts that the average person and the man in the street doesn't really get to find out about.
So what were the complicated answers that he got from these military people?
I don't know that. I wasn't able to go into that in detail with that conversation I had with him, but it certainly bothered him for him to start talking about it. Okay, during 1993 I was becoming pretty friendly with a former MI5 agent. He had been an MI5 agent from about 1980 to 1984 and was extremely highly placed. He'd been so highly placed, he was the first man with one other MI5 agent standing beside him, shouted at by Margaret Thatcher just 2 minutes after the Belgrano was sunk. He said that to me. So we became pretty friendly in around about 1993, and we're just going out having casual drinks with each other, enjoying each other's company, and at one point, standing drinking a pint or two in the Southsider pub in Edinburgh, he said to me, I had to know that US Air Force Bentwaters incident, that Rendlesham Forest stuff, was definitely alien contact. We were put on a war footing in case war broke out between us and them.
What's this about? You just get back to that statement where you were definitely about Rendlesham.
Yeah. Well,
who's saying this? Just start with a complete sentence.
Right, the former MI5 agent I became friendly with, he and I were standing in the Southsider pub, each standing drinking a pint of beer, and the former MI5 agent said, I had to know that that Rendlesham Forest incident near US Air Force Bentwaters was definitely alien contact. We were put on a war footing in case war broke out between us and them. Now that correlates with the aggressiveness, right? Okay, that correlates with the aggressiveness claimed by the charity employed confidant, who said that in 1984 he was aware of American CIA agents clawing their way to the top of charities to redirect money to black projects in America because a violent argument had happened between alien beings, 3 small alien beings, and the top American military generals. So, like, you see these things, the jigsaw pieces all seem to be fitting together.
So the point about putting these pieces together, what do they all come together as?
Well, it does seem like the clash, to me, the clash between the Americans and the small alien beings in late December 1980 really does seem reminiscent of the violence of the clash in 1917 between the newly formed Soviet Union and the capitalist powers. That's all I can think. The ideological thing, the way the Nazis went absolutely hell for leather for attacking the Soviet Union and suffered greatly in doing so. The capitalist oligarchies of Germany, given a financial donation in 1936 by an ancestor of George Bush himself, Prescott Bush, were so ideologically opposed to the Soviet Union they very, very violently attacked them, and there seems to have been a similar violence of clash between American capitalist generals and little alien beings that don't see the sense of using money either and think it's the more advanced state of society to be in, and is much better for the general economic well-being of the planet's population. But the American military capitalist generals wouldn't take that.
Okay, I want to we initiated all this about Ron Adams.
Yeah.
You're researching, you've come back to research Ron Adams. What
That's
has
right,
brought you back in 2011 Do we
Yeah.
even talk about Ron Adams again?
Well, the commemorative event of the Rendlesham Forest incident of late December 1980 that happened recently on the 28th of December in Woodbridge Community Town Hall uh, with two former Bentwaters personnel there, Jim Penniston and John Burrows, and Linda Moulton Howe. Larry Warren was present in the audience, but he got up on stage and said a few things on the demand of Peter Robbins, who did the introductory address. That re-stimulated a lot in my mind, and I wanted to get back in touch with Nicola Lisa Williams, who put me in touch with Ron Adams, and I started remembering all that about Ron Adams. I started remembering the statements that the US Air Force Bentwaters personnel suddenly cut off from Ron Adams' family, totally without explanation. And all of these little bits of information have been quite important for people like Jim Beniston and John Burroughs, because they would like to develop a legal case against the American military for maintaining this secrecy. I mean, Charles Holt is very angry. It's one of the things we heard recently, because a certain effort of, I think it's Gordon Williams, had tried to describe Charles Holt's pronouncements as treacherous to his country, a traitor to his country and stuff, then well, that has angered Charles Holt quite a bit. So
how did Ron Adams die? Is rumours going around, or these statements being said that he was the Greys were coming after him?
Ron Adams certainly believed he'd been abducted a hell of a high number of times, more frequently than the rest of his family. He was age 65 at the time I was meeting him in 1994, and he died pretty soon after of a heart attack. That was pretty soon after that one meeting I had with him. I know Nicola told me that Ron had been abducted quite a number of times just before he died, and he thought the Greys were becoming really heavy towards him, or were being really aggressive towards him. So, and he thought they were maybe going to kill him, basically. That's what he did think. So Ron may have simply had a heart attack, and I know he was a smoker. I mean, he did smoke cigarettes, but he didn't seem particularly heavily smoking. I mean, my mother's a smoker and she's 82. It's still alive right now. But, I think Ron may have had a heart attack due to other reasons, or he may have not even had a heart attack. That's a very difficult question. Nicola is quite suspicious of Ron Adams' death, is all I'll say. It's Nicola that's suspicious.
And what did Ron do? He had a bookshop, or what? He was also into Aleister Crowley and other things?
Well, Ron had quite a lot of MIB experiences while he was running the bookshop, but at the moment I really need to go into greater detail about that and find out more. I need to go round to that bookshop myself and find out more about the past of Ron Adams and get more details, but at the moment I maybe have run out of the most important things to say. I liked the former MI5 agent's description of Element 115, which is what Bob Lazar is quite famous for. The former MI5's description was that Element 115 is unstable in time. He started off describing this to me in the South Sider pub again. He said that weapons-grade plutonium behaves mysteriously as well. They leave it in a container, in a room, and they go out, they notice their watches go out of sync, and when they come back, the lump of plutonium that was in the container has rematerialized outside of the container. It's lying on the floor, halfway up the wall, on the ceiling. That's the top secret property of plutonium, is that it's unstable in space. That's the way he put it. Plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium is unstable in space, but it does have an effect on time. Element 115, which you've heard about from Bob Lazar as being the threepenny bit-like piece of metal which the alien beings used to catapult their craft across space at the terrific speeds and terrific speed of location change across the universe. Element 115 is unstable in time, so that what they've had to do to figure out that it's unstable in time is that when element 115 is in a different position as per plutonium, weapons-grade plutonium 109 on the periodic table, the element 115 will be in a different position, but it's in a position that it was in, say, 3 hours before. So they had to figure out that the reason for element 115 shifting around in space was actually that it wasn't moving in space, it was moving in time. I thought that was quite an interesting description, and when I repeated all that to Jeff Gilbertson in front of another former military personnel guy, a former type of electronics technician who'd been employed as an electronics technician in 1970, in front of the electronics technician was called Tiny Riches. I turned to Tiny Riches after I described that to Jeff, and Tiny went, "How did you know about all that?" And I said, "Well, actually, a former MI5 agent told me, but it's sort of been started off by this guy called Bob Lazar." And Tiny Riches went, or described him. He said, "That's where the hive queen is." I thought that was quite a mysterious statement.
And your conclusion to that is?
I just think that's one of the most mysterious things I've ever had said to me, and I didn't follow it up. And the former MI5 agent did become a bit wary of what he was saying to me, so I think mostly he basically left it at that. He didn't say very much, but, well, there are other things he did say later on, but I think that's the most I got out of him. So
okay,
maybe we'll conclude it there.
Yep.
Essentially, Brenda has had a team of people going to the forest for some time. Have you been part of that team, and what sort of things have been going on there?
We have, for the last 12 years, we've developed a friendship with Brenda Butler. We've got to know the lady, and I think she's got to know us, and she's been very much a driving force with our research, not necessarily around the Rendlesham incident of December 1980, but has provided valuable assistance with many other cases that she's looked at going back a considerable number of years when she worked with Ron West from the Essex group. Yeah.
So what sort of current events have happened recently there in 2006, August, September?
Well, the events of which you have actually been party yourself have involved what they generally refer to as a port, where stones, not other objects have fallen, but stones, as far as we know, stones from, not from a great height, but apparently at an angle, sometimes skipping through the trees to land near you. Now, many people will say, when they hear this sort of information, that it must be somebody throwing the stones, or it must be hoaxing. Well, it certainly is neither of that, because these falls of stones take place quite deep in the forest, and they've been happening over the last, would you say, last 6 months or 12 months?
Or
Dawn?
even longer than
Probably even longer than that. They are relatively a new phenomenon to us, but I have experienced, as indeed Brenda and as indeed yourself and Dawn, where these things have fallen next to us, obviously during the night. Although Brenda has told me they have happened in the day, but the stones are hot, which would suggest, of course, logic would indicate that they've heated up, but I don't think they've heated up through the atmosphere. So I can't say where the stones have come from. We do know that over the years, these reports where falls of stones have taken place all over the world are connected with paranormal or poltergeist phenomenon. But of course, one should always remember that paranormal is out of the normal. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's anything to do with ghosts. All we can do is tell you what has happened, as indeed you can only say what's happened to yourself. But there is no answer. They're inexplicable. We can't give an answer. Whether, these falls of stones happen all over the country at various places is a possibility, is not only is a remote possibility, but may happen. Now, we've looked at reports. We've looked at a case that Arthur C. Clarke researched into, which took place in Birmingham in 1980 sometime, was it, Dawn?
Yes.
Dawn always reminds me of the dates, because sometimes I can forget. But this was where a lady was having lots and lots of smooth, round, polished, pebble-like stones falling on the house, and the police staked the place out, and they did this for 18 months. They had night surveillance equipment, they had all sorts of things, and they failed to catch the offender. And there is another case in Doncaster that Dave Sankey, my colleague, told me about, and I spoke to the gentleman concerned, where he was having half house bricks fall on his house. Now, the police at Doncaster, once again, set up an operation which lasted for a number of years, but failed to catch the offender. And we've spoken to a number of officers, not only there, but used to, that were involved in the Birmingham operation, where these things, they've sometimes seen rains of stones fall into the sky, and invariably they're always round, smooth and polished. And of course, it is a phenomenon that has taken place in other countries all over the world. So it's inexplicable. I suppose it's a bit like Fortean phenomena, but who knows where the stuff comes from? I don't even hazard a guess. It may be absolutely nothing to do with the alleged event at Rendlesham in 1980. Who knows?
What about current events at Rendlesham? Have you been engaged with ET activity there with Brenda?
Well, I have my own views on this. I respect, Brenda tells us she has conversations and that she channels information from ETs. She may well do. I can neither prove nor disprove. I have absolutely faith in everything that Brenda tells me, but I personally have never had that contact. Although I've seen a number of photographs that depict some very strange shapes and some very, as you know yourself, there's been an awful lot of orbs seen down there. Not only orbs, but strange streakers and all sorts of strange things that may be indigenous to the forest, but may well have a lot to do with Brenda's interaction with the forest, and if you like, Brenda's faith, because Brenda is obviously a researcher she's been doing this for a lot longer than me, and it may well be that she provides the key to what happens down there, because a lot of photographs that I take don't pick up the orbs, but I can pick up the orbs by light blasting the photographs. Now, we've tried various cameras, we've tried various situations down there, but Brenda will always, as you know, pick up orbs and pick up all sorts of strange things on film that I don't pick up. And that has been a source of much frustration to people that go down there. Although generally speaking, if you visit the forest and you visit with Brenda, you probably will pick quite a lot up on your camera, but not as much as Brenda. But even with all that's happened and the stones, I still remain unconvinced that can be associated automatically with the events that took place in December 80. As I said before at the talk, there is a lot of suggestion that the so-called UFO incident took place in November 1980, and that is a matter I've discussed with Brenda.
Date displacement as a means of discouraging people finding out what's really going on?
Well, I don't know, because I can't really answer that. I suppose being an ex-cop, I tend to look at things factually, and we met up with people who've, excuse me, who've talked about the matters that took place in 1980. One man we met up with told us about he was driving past the security gates at Woodbridge, and he saw this thing crash through the railings, and he's put us in touch with others. This is one of our current inquiries. But again,
you're talking about activity at the North Gate rather than.
Well, it would be the North Gate. Yeah, it certainly wouldn't be near the East Gate. No, it wasn't near the East Gate. But I mean, I don't know where all this perhaps leads you.
So you're suggesting that basically the multiple incidents at the base happened in November of 1980?
I'm saying that there is information that suggests that incidents took place at the end of November 1980, and that is a matter that Brenda has pondered with. Brenda, who is an authority on that particular issue, has not turned around to me and said, "Oh, John, you got it all mistaken, it was December." Brenda obviously has researched into the events that took place in December 80, but has always, as I said to you before, pondered whether the incidents that were brought to her attention in late November 80, whether there is a connection. I mean,
what were the incidents in November?
Not dissimilar to what had as allegedly happened towards the end of December 1980.
Are you referring to a landing of objects, which then?
Well, as I said, I believe that from my information that there was a landing, and that certainly was, but I doubt very much whether it was a landing of any extraterrestrial or interdimensional or whatever name you like to call it. I don't necessarily believe that. But of course, we've got to bear in mind the activity went on for 3 nights. How, I don't know, for all I know, that something may have happened the night before when, if you listen to what Colonel Holt and the others have said, was that a UFO landing? Was that something to do with the events that took place perhaps before the other event happened? I mean, I just don't know.
It's been hinted that it may involve some kind of high technology.
Well, you've already, as it's all right. It's Mr. Because he's come in and stopped my flow. Right, can you start again now? Yeah, I'm in a shit now. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so briefly, what's your summary of what you think happened in November,
Well,
December?
what I want to point out first of all is that we've been looking at the events between 1977 and 1980. One would be very unwise to put all your eggs in one basket. The Rendlesham case, fascinating as it is, took place, we say allegedly because I don't know. We met many of the characters or the people that were involved in that seem very genuine indeed, so something very genuine happened. But as I've said many times over, I think the biggest danger with UFO research is to make that giant leap and form conclusions by ill-informed research and come to the sort of conclusion like many others have done over the years, because honestly they have no more idea than I have. As I say, during the period 77 to 80, you could also talk about other periods in the UK going back to the 1940s. Activity has been most prolific over 3 or 4 year cycles. And there was a lot of activity, 77 to 80. We have never wanted really to concentrate on Rendlesham because it's a subject that has been really if you like, thrashed into submission by so many people that have looked at it over the years and researched into it. We would want to offer, what we would look for is events that have happened a few days before or maybe a few days after in 1981. That's what we would look at. And we have a lot of information to back up UFO reports and strange sightings that took place initially, before and afterwards. Whether that necessarily implies that what happened at Rendlesham is genuine and did happen is another matter. I mean...
But you're focusing now on publishing your work in a book. Can you talk about that?
I am, yes. We've been cataloguing, researching, reinvestigating and putting together chronologically a number of volumes that are dedicated to bringing to the public's attention some pretty fascinating experiences that have taken place going back to 1940, and a lot of them around the East Anglian area. What I would say is that from our research, if UFOs have come into English airspace, they will invariably have come across the East Anglia countryside. You go back to the 40s, a lot of stuff has happened over East Anglia. We have one case where a pilot, United States Air Force pilot, he was 3 seconds from actually, he was ordered to intercept a UFO over East Anglia. This was in 1957, and he was 3 seconds from firing his cannons at this UFO, which, as he said, was extraordinary for a United States Air Forceman to be given instructions to fire rockets at a UFO over civilian territory below. But 3 seconds before he actually fired it was a salvo of rockets at the object. It suddenly shot upwards and disappeared. And we have a lot of cases over the East Anglia. I mean, you've talked about the Rendlesham case. One of the officers that attended this, we spoke to Dave Hill, who attended the scene, and also another gentleman, a Mr. Martin. He was there as well, and he had quite an interesting UFO sighting. I think it was the following year, or 1983. I think it was 1983, but he was at Woodbridge. That's right, he was at Woodbridge Police Station, and a member of the public came in on a motorcycle and said, "I've just seen this UFO outside." And the officer went out and he saw this huge, like a fairground wheel in the sky, spinning with lights. And but as I say, he didn't actually see anything when he went to the scene. But we have interviewed other witnesses. But so that's about it.
Well, sir, what brings you to a UFO conference? What's your central essence? What message you get across?
I'm a masochist, and when I want to get beat up, and no, my primary field, of course, is in national and international security. But I used to run an interagency group that looked at the phenomena, and I finally decided to write about it and put the words out. The basic premise is UFOs are absolutely real, and yet the universe is probably more complex than we ever imagined, and there's not going to be any simple answers.
So it's transdimensional, then?
I'm sorry?
It's a dimensional issue as opposed to an interplanetary issue?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you had to guess, certainly interplanetary issues are one option. But the problem that I see is you have from little balls of light to very, very large craft, a mile or more, hard, and everything in between. And that's why I say no simple answer, and particularly when you have things that just disappear.
So where has the data come to provide us with very, very large craft, that sort of size?
Where's
Where's that data set? Who's saying that's actually happening?
I mean, you talk about large physical craft, they come from many sources. One that I use in here is a night sighting with multiple commercial airplanes, both of whom were piloted by former Air Force officers with lots of experience in night flying. And because of where they were and their relative position, we can extrapolate the size of what they looked at. And that one was over a mile across as a minimum. We have other sightings, for instance, here in the desert Southwest, with people flying over and seeing a craft spanning a mesa, and we know that the distance between is a mile across, and yet this is overlapping both sides of it. Multiple witnesses. This is not a light in the sky.
So you're saying this is real or happening?
Oh, absolutely real. There's no doubt about it. The problem is when you come to the therefore, what is it? And I frankly don't know. My argument is twofold. One, that we need to make it permissible for scientists to get involved without doing damage to their career.
Yes.
So you get the right kind of brain power involved.
Which is very important because we're not getting that.
Yeah, that's it. This is toxic. And that's totally true in the scientific community, and it is in the political community. That's why you're not going to find politicians who are willing to step out and take a stance. The few that have get ridiculed. I use the example of my friend Senator Claiborne Pell, a six-term senator. In his obituary, the Washington Post ripped him over his interest in phenomenology.
So is the exopolitics movement, Steve Bassett and all that movement trying to push it on a political agenda, do you think that's helping?
Well, one of the things I argue, Steve is a great guy, but he is the only UFO lobbyist in Washington. You compare that to the smoking or healthcare industry. When the healthcare bill was up, every congressman was getting hit 5 to 6 times a day. And that tells you the size and the strength of that kind of a lobbying effort. So you want to compare it to one poor guy who was, running around doing the best job he can. It kind of pales. It's very hard to get their attention. And you still have to get over the giggle factor.
Yeah.
And you do have, I will say, and I know he's been successful, and as you may know, we almost had hearings at one point. But the people were very leery of having their name attached to it. And, it's a very risky issue.
So how do we target the scientific community to actually get the courage to get involved?
Well, the scientific community talks about advances, provided you're talking small incremental advances. There's very few things that they will get in where they really want big leaps. As Max Planck said, science advances one funeral at a time.
Yes, which is basically generational.
Yes, unfortunately. And getting them, the problem is twofold. Here again is that the Condon report, which was terrible, quite frankly, particularly the conclusions in that, ill-founded, not well researched, even though the body of the text had talked about real UFO. But the perception that was put forward in the scientific community was that it was a thorough scientific report, which it wasn't. And it has contaminated everything to this date. When you talk to most scientists who have had no exposure to the field, they will tell, well, that's been done, And it was done, and there's a couple issues. One of them is that the question to Condon was not, are UFOs real? The question was, is this a threat to the United States?
And it was really designed to bury the problem.
Oh, it was, the Air Force wanted it to go away. An action passed is an action handled, and by doing this, by making it go away, you don't have to commit resources to it. And Condon may have been right because we haven't had an invasion, since.
Well, some people might say the invasion's already happened.
Well, I understand, but at least there's, you don't walk outside and see alien spacecraft hovering out there or things of that nature. But the point is that the scientific community thinks it was well done, which it wasn't, and they also know, the few that venture into the field, that they become contaminated. My specific example, if I might, I was doing an interview with Scientific American, who came in with an ad hominem attack in 1993, and it said basically that Alexander believes things that most scientists are skeptical of, therefore my judgment must be questioned. And the point is, we weren't discussing UFOs. We were discussing non-lethal weapons. So they didn't like that topic, they were using this to attack me.
Was that possibly an agenda by the lethal weapons industry that?
Oh no! This was early on in the non-lethal weapons development, and they basically didn't think much of it. It, weapons are to kill people, and I was arguing no.
What are non-lethal weapons? Are we talking scalar beam weapon things, weather engineering?
Non-lethal weapons are a very, very broad category, and they run from low things that you know about, from tasers and pepper ball and even water cannons and things of that nature, all the way to strategic incapacitation. By that I mean going after, say, the electrical infrastructure of a nation state or things of that nature, and lots of things in between. But see, my argument is that war is not about killing people. War is about imposing will. And so having options in between doing nothing and doing too much are essential.
So you also had a contact with remote viewing, that kind of thing?
I'm sorry?
Remote viewing involves some kind of psychic experiments or related experiments?
Not if we're linking that to non-lethal weapons. No, remote viewing is closer to actually the phenomenologies. Because one of the things that I have argued strongly for is what we need is a step back. In other words, instead of talking about UFOs, near-death experience, remote viewing, poltergeist, whatever it is, many of these things are probably interrelated. And what we need to do is to put on the observations that we see, and then from that go back and do macro pattern analysis and see where it goes. Unfortunately today, we draw boxes like it's a UFO. Well, what's a UFO? Balls of light, very large, or related phenomena, and which ones fit, which ones don't fit. This is where I say we're not about to answer these questions. What we need is to formulate the right ones. And that's where you need a lot of brain power brought into it, as well as people who've had a breadth of observations and can report on them.
So, again, we're focusing back on the scientific community, which needs to get involved. So how do you propose that's best achieved?
With great difficulty. It's just, as I say, there's got to be more conferences, and this is not the conference. The problem for the UFO community is that they're their worst enemies. And they come in with things that are patently ridiculous and, demonstrably false. Well, I don't want to take individual names on, if you will, but I literally saw people out here with tinfoil hats on. Now, they were being specious, but, that is the perception. And what happens with the skeptical community, who's here, they glom onto the things that are farthest out that have the least probability of being true, and then extrapolate and see, therefore, all the rest of these guys are crazy. Why would you ever want to get involved?
In other words, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Oh, very much so.
Well, Nick Pope was reporting at this conference on the Professor Paul Davies and a series of conferences in England with the Royal Society. Do you think that's the way of moving forward?
It certainly is, but you also notice that he mentioned that they didn't talk about UFOs. They talked about a generic exobiology approach. And so when I did the studies, I ran an interagency study on it. We called it Advanced Theoretical Physics. And it was specifically so we could get around both FOIA and people, the giggle factor, because it allowed us to meet and have discussions with people who otherwise would never have talked to us.
In the military, what do you call them? How do you discuss them?
I'm sorry?
In a military strategic point of view, if you're going to deal with things which could be separated from perhaps a hostile attack by an enemy or whatever, how is that distinguished? How do you encounter and discuss it? Call them UFOs?
Well, again, there have been interactions between UFOs and other systems with strategic weapon systems as well as tactical ones as well. In general, it's been put in the too tough to handle bin. There was a whole series of sightings, what they call the Northern Tier sightings, over our strategic arsenal. And some direct interaction with weapon systems, and that the similar things experienced by the Soviets.
You're saying they shut down the nuclear weapons systems. You're talking about things like that.
Well, I use this example. In our case, we had a situation in which a number of missiles were brought offline with the UFO above it. The Soviets' attack was one in which UFO was hovering there for hours, seen by lots of people above ground, and their missiles are spinning up, getting ready to launch. The difference was the command and control system. We trusted our people in the silos, they didn't. So ours, the guys could launch it, so shutting it down was a bad thing. For them, Moscow was in control, and so spinning it up meant it was out of control. That was a bad thing. And they totally tore the launch system apart. They assumed it was an electromagnetic anomaly of some kind, could not find anything. Unfortunately, our approach has been they study it and look at it and say, what the hell? Don't have a good answer, so they put it in the too tough to handle bin. And if it happens again, we'll come back and get serious.
What about the theory that there was recent information that the German anti-gravity technology at the end of the war maybe escaped to a third party, and maybe that's because
I don't have enough information. I mean, I hear the same rumors you have.
in other words,
I don't believe it.
Germans
I do think they were working, but of course my point would be, if they were really advanced, they lost. If they were really good, you would have seen it. And this is one of my arguments in other technologies, is why is it not there? To say, we're now in the longest war that we've had. I would expect to see these technologies emerge and used.
There's been some researchers in the community have suggested there's an awful lot of contact with the military and abductees. And some people call these military abductees. And there's a research
my labs, very familiar with this.
So is this the military trying to figure out what's going on, or what?
It's basically not happening. I mean, that's a non-starter. And I have lectured on this when I'm in Europe. I've been picketed. I've had the Polizei outside. It'll probably happen again in May when I'm in Germany, and they have the Polizei comes in to contain the pickets.
Why such a reaction?
Well, the point is, I mean, they're nice folks, and I sit down and discuss these things with them. The more practical answer really gets down when you look at the number of people who are seriously disturbed. For instance, the number in the population around the world that are probably could be classified literally as paranoid is 0.5%. That doesn't sound like a lot until you say, in the United States, that's 1.5 million people. So when you start putting real numbers on it, do I believe that? Do I believe, if I take it from the other side, I was asked why? And that's an answer they can never, answer or come up with is, why would you do this? You're risking an awful lot, because this would be go to jail. It's absolutely criminal if it were true. And you would be risking your career, your life, your livelihood for very little gain. And
why would there be no gain? I mean, if you could find out from alleged abductees,
I could find out what? What would I find out?
Well, let's postulate somebody had been abducted by aliens.
Well, we know how to, do or conduct psychological studies. One of the first things that you want to do in these areas is establish parameters. Therefore, you would not use folks who are running around freely that you can't control and can't control the parameters and have follow-ups and all of that. It just pales by making sense. And I'll extrapolate one further. I've heard this in cattle mutilations, that the military are involved. That also makes no sense whatsoever. If you want the data, buy the cows. You could buy them surreptitiously and do the same test with no risk. Yeah.
So we've established that there are UFOs. There are very
Yeah.
large ones. What
And
further
very small ones.
very small ones. What sort of contact has the military had? Has there been any two-way liaison of any description?
No, virtually none. And here again, we get back to the Condon report, and we must distinguish between individual interest and institutional interest. Because one of the things I point out is, like the adult population in the U.S., probably 7 to 10% of not just the military, but government workers have seen UFOs, and they've had a breadth of experience. We had folks here that talked about walking up and touching them, guys I happen to believe. You had a colonel come
We're
in.
referring specifically to the Bentwaters.
Yeah, this is the Bentwaters case, obviously. But you had Chuck Halt come in and talk about some other pretty amazing things that happened. 80 key witnesses and that. And you also heard what he said happened when he turned in the report. You know, first one was, throw it to the Limeys. The Brits said, throw it back to the...
Delegate responsibilities.
We'll throw it. Well, not my job, man. I don't know what it is, make it go away.
So, but we've got a situation where that story is run and run, and it's still with us. And now we have senior military officers from U.S. Air Force Base, which was on alert at the time, now talking at a UFO conference. So where do you think this is leading us?
Well, don't know. And again, the point here, I think, is that's one of the cases that's come out. The high-quality data, high-quality witnesses that are involved. Having said that, there's also a lot of smoke and mirrors. If you remember that Colonel Halt addressed one where a guy wrote a book, and I had talked to him about this guy for years, and highly improbable that he was even present, although it became a first-hand account when it came out. So that's the problem with most of these things is the waters get muddied pretty quickly.
It's been suggested that if he hadn't done that, the case would have been very bad.
Well, don't know. Well, when the so-called Halt memo came out, that really kind of opened the dams, and so the floodgates were there. The book would have gone away. Don't know. But the one thing about the Bentwaters case, because I've watched this for a long, long time, is that it gets stronger and stronger over time. The ones that are not so good tend to dissipate over time. This one gets better, more witnesses, and there's a lot more to it. There's still pieces to come out. One of the things.
What are those cases?
Oh, well, one of the things was mentioned yesterday, and that was that, by the way, these things had started in the 70s. There were other cases that just never did make it in the public domain. They weren't quite as dramatic as this particular case. The other thing that I learned was that this was so interesting that the staff of the base, they actually had radio communication at home, which was a normal thing. This was not abnormal. But it got to where the families and everybody were monitoring the MP nets to hear when the UFOs came back. And it went on for quite a while. Again, the sightings weren't quite as dramatic, but they were getting there.
What do I mean by quite a while?
Well, that was in months.
Because there's events being reported there by civilian witnesses to this day.
Yeah. Oh, I don't doubt it. And the point is, you go back.
Even back to World War II.
I have a paper which you may be able to find someplace. I forget where it was published. I would have to run it down. But what I looked at was the anatomy of phenomena and how these things emerge.
Is that the title of the paper?
I don't remember. I'd actually have to look it up, and should remember where I published it, but I didn't. I got asked to do it. May have been a UFO journal. I know I did give a talk on it at the SSE, if you're familiar with that, Society for Scientific Exploration. But it's how do you analyze a phenomenon? You have an event. And the point is, then pretty soon you've got multiple events, and then you go out and then you start doing, grouping analysis on it. and then eventually you do a kind of a macro analysis, and what you almost always find out is that these events started long before you thought they were. And it probably was a misnomer because it kind of gets the nomenclature established, by the critical event. Flying saucers, where that came from, is a classic example.
Are you suggesting that there were events happening at Rendlesham headquarters during World War II when the base was first?
I'm not familiar with that, but I would not be surprised at all. If I look at, say, Skinwalker Ranch, where we had incidents that happened, and then as you start looking, some of this went back centuries. There were unusual events happening in the area.
Are you suggesting there were Skinwalker type events happening at Rendlesham, as some researchers have suggested?
Not sure. Not sure.
So
I hear those rumors, but I don't. The other piece I have, at least secondhand, I talked to the principals involved. The other is more generic, and I put that in the if you believe.
What gets a respectable senior Army officer such as yourself involved with this kind of subject?
Much more of my publications have to do with that. I did Future War and Winning the War, which had to do with non-lethal weapons and other weapon systems. I've done a series of monographs. Last year I had a chapter in the future of biological warfare. I've done one just now on the convergence of how special operations forces and civilian law enforcement are coming together, particularly in fighting terrorism. And I've just recently done one on the irregular warfare in Africa.
So
that's the kind of things that I know. Huh?
Why the book on UFOs then? What gets you involved in that?
Well, I have been interested for, almost 6 decades. So this is not like a new interest, but it was there.
Philip Corso published a book, and there was a technology exchange alleged.
Yeah.
There was technology exchange alleged with a certain set of crashes.
Right.
What do you think about that?
Well, I knew Phil Corso before the book came out and after. I was with him a week before he died. And the problem is there's absolutely no evidence to support any technological advantage or that this ever occurred. If you look at the history of all those technologies, which we did, what you see is a straight line progression. At no point you see a step function that should have happened if there was something interjected that would take it to a new level.
I think it's suggested that the transistor was an alien invention.
What was
the transistor, the invention of the transistor?
There's a host of them. There's transistors, there's fiber optics. Night vision is the one I'm most familiar with because it's supposed to be from alien eyelids and that. The guy who literally built an open night vision lab was a personal friend, and I addressed that with him. And here's the conundrum is that Phil tells a story of going down with $5 million and giving it to him to make this advance. The incident is actually in the organizational history. The name was not Phil Corso.
Well, very briefly, is there anything you really want to get across? What's the main thing to stop an inch bulbs?
Yeah, I want to get across is UFOs are real. The phenomenon is terribly complex, and we really need to make it permissible for scientists to get involved and do so without personal risk to their careers.
Is there a time scale, do you think, that we need to really get our act together on this?
Well, that's a whole other set of briefings because my main briefings are on the geotransformational changes that are taking place and things like the nation state as a failing concept and whatnot. Well, I have a cute slide in there that says, and I use this in the straight briefings as well, that the ET didn't answer the phone. The world is declining rapidly as we look at wealth that's acquiring and going to a narrower and narrower set. Poverty across the world is increasing. Food prices are now at an all-time high. We're seeing climate change that really needs to be addressed. And these are issues that we'd really better get moving on.
But you're
And energy, of course, is a key factor there. And I'm all in favor of high risk, high payoff.
But
We also hypothesized, when I had the study, that there were things to be gained even if you didn't have a UFO. If you just had the ability to take the observations and give you the model for where you're trying to go, that's critically important in innovating in any given field.
gives you a target to aim for.
Right.
But that indicates that we do need to talk to ET then.
You have a what?
We do need to talk to ET.
Well, I think you saw my slide is that if ET is here, certainly hasn't helped. If you look at, the wars that are going on in the world, certainly hasn't interceded there and preventing us from killing each other. As I mentioned, the food prices right now, you have at least 1 billion hungry people in the world, maybe more, and that increasing, and as I said, the world food price index going up. If they know how to grow crops better, that would be helpful. If they could improve the water supply, that would be helpful, and you just don't see it.
But where do we get the connection? Where do we get the can-do and the effective working solution between those actual UFO events, those big UFOs, and the small ones, and all those reports that you're referring to? How do we get that to work?
Well, I think we need to go back to the beginning. And what we need to do is to analyze the process and come up with the right questions. I think we're approaching it wrong. And, if you don't start with the right questions or the right parameters, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Well, what are those questions and what are those?
Well, I don't know. That's the point. That is what we need to sit down and get a lot of bright people to sit down and discuss. And right now you can't do that. It's not permissible, without great risk. Hence what you saw with Nick. I thought that was kind of interesting. Some of these things like consider a post-biological universe.
Address?
That's pretty unique thought. Maybe you can get there, but they didn't say post-biological universe that is governed by ET or UFOs. I mean, you leave those emotionally charged words out of it.
Okay, thank you very much.